Since you call us to come into your presence.
But I'm excited to say, because we are now an official extension school, or well, it's not the right term, satellite school of Sunset International Bible Institute, we have an opportunity not only to offer some courses on Monday nights or Tuesday nights or whatever we choose on that, but why not offer some courses that you could take for college credit, college level course on Sunday morning. So in here at 9 o'clock next week, we'll be offering the book of Acts. If you're interested in taking that, either audit, a certificate program, which just you get a certificate from Sunset when you complete all the courses, same thing I went through, or if you want to take it at a bachelor's degree level, all of those things are possible. It's the same classes. If the certificate program and the bachelor's program both take the same test requirement, the difference is in the amount of memorization work and the amount of research papers. So if you take it for certificate, you're going to have to memorize, if I remember, 29 verses. If you take it for college credit, I think you're going to memorize 63 verses. Don't quote me on that. I think it's how many it is. And you're going to write a couple of research papers. So same videos, same self-study things that we do at the end. But I'm excited about that. Let Paul know there's a sign-up sheet. Do it that way. There's a sign-up sheet in the foyer if you want to sign up for that. And that's only if you want the materials. I suggest you need to get this guide, $11, right? No matter which level, I believe. If you're taking, you need to buy a guide. And then I don't think there's any additional books for the certificate. I know that there's 3 textbooks in addition to this if you're taking it for bachelor's. All right, enough of the commercial. Now I'll give the proviso. We have time for a proviso. I'll go in my office. It would be 2 weeks ago tomorrow, right? And I go in my office and I'm thinking, what could I... And for some reason, I don't remember how I came up with the title and the idea for a sermon, but it's not very many weeks do I come in on Monday and already have a sermon idea and start writing the sermon. By Tuesday, I've got it in the bag. Wednesday morning, I come in and think, Sunday's Easter. I probably ought to preach something about the resurrection, right? Which this lesson is not about the resurrection. So I wrote another sermon, and we had it last week. And so now I find myself staring at a set of notes that I wrote nearly 2 weeks ago, and they're not nearly as familiar to me as I would hope. So I actually work better if it happens toward the end of the week. It's fresh in my mind. My short-term memory is getting tough, right? It's getting tough for that. But the concept is easy enough. I've entitled the lesson, The Problem with Me. And I want to read you what I kind of wrote down here as an introductory statement. We don't have to work at thinking of or being concerned for ourselves. Concern for self would seem to be the source of happiness and fulfillment, yet it is actually selflessness that brings us ultimate joy. Let us look this morning at what it means to place too much emphasis on ourselves. So I want to talk about this idea of the problem with me. And the problem with me is when I'm focused on me, I'm thinking selfishly. But I'm also thinking of others as being less than me, less deserving, less important. And so it's the natural state of man, isn't it? To have self-interest. And not all of self-interest is evil, but all evil has at its heart self-interest. I want to share with us the reading in Ezekiel 34:18 and following. Look at verses 18 and 19. Is it not enough for you to feed on the good pasture, that you must tread down with your feet the rest of the pasture, and to drink of clear water, that you must muddy the rest of the water with your feet? And must my sheep eat what you have trodden with your feet, and drink what you have muddied with your feet? Now, I won't read, I was going to read a lexicon entry on this, and it doesn't matter, actually a Bible dictionary entry. But he's addressing the shepherds of Israel in this passage. And who are the shepherds of Israel? Well, they're the kings and the princes and the priests. And if you look at the passage, what he's saying is, you're selfish. I've made you shepherds of my flock. And the flock was all of the people. It was all of the fat and the wool, the tithes and the offerings, the taxes, everything that made up the people that they got their hands on. They were selfish with it and spent it on selfish interest. And the picture he uses, and it's almost really the picture of the sheep, the herd animal. And if you're a rancher, you know that this happens, right? You put out a round bale and they'll eat maybe half of it, maybe. They're going to stomp a lot of it. You put them out on a wheat pasture, they're going to eat a lot of it. They're going to stomp a lot of it. If they walk out there to a pond that the mud has settled out in and the water's pretty clear, they're going to go in there and tromp it and it's going to get muddy. That's what they do. But that's not what a shepherd ought to do. Leadership was only concerned for themselves. And if you really put it down into what it really is they were hurting people. They should have been helping people. They should have been shepherding the people. They should have been providing for the people, leading the people into pastures and feeding. But that's not what they were doing. And we see this all of the time in politics. There may be some things that a politician may point to illustrate some good that they have done for his or her constituents. But if you'll watch many politicians today, many lifelong politicians today, leave politics extremely wealthy. How does that happen? I'm asking you, and I don't mean to be overly political. But there's a problem in our country when someone takes a job and the job only pays a kind of a normal amount of money until you get to the highest levels and it pays decent. But when you leave with tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, there is a problem. I think we've all seen televangelists who fleece the people that are largely on fixed incomes. They can't get out. They at least want to watch a service on television. The televangelist gets up there and tells them, look, if you'll just send me your money, God's going to bless you in ways. And so he takes people who can't afford to give their entire check to send them their entire check on a false promise. But I think we'd be in error to think of this selfishness and only think about political leaders, religious leaders, and different ones. Ultimately, we need to take the text and apply it to ourselves. Are we selfish? As we look at these things, in what ways am I selfish? How is it that I do look at others? How do I view them? And what is it that I give in regards to my own money and my own time? You see, we'll get a good indication if we'll just look where all of our money goes and where all of our time goes as to who we are interested in. Amen? Do I spend it all on myself? Money and time. And I can say that I love others. I can think to myself, I really have warm affection for others. I want good for others. But if I never do good for others, do I really love them? So the problem with me is selfishness. The problem with me is I consider others as being less than myself. The better place, we'll call it equal concern. That we are as concerned for others as we are for ourselves. That's a better idea. It's a God idea. Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 18, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. That's a better place to be. And I'm not going to criticize it as an incomplete thing to be. It's a God thing. He commanded us to do that. In fact, the entire law of Moses was based on the idea that I should treat my neighbor as myself, as well as the idea of loving God as first and foremost. This idea of equal concern, it did a lot of things that are good. It limited retribution. If you hit me in the face, I probably want to pick up a baseball bat and beat you to death. That's what I want to do, right? Y'all are looking at me funny now, right? But if we're honest, isn't that right? You know, we don't go, I think you put 1.25 inch scratch on my face, let me get my measuring stick out and just put 1 inch. That's not the way we do, but that's what the law said, right? It limited retribution, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You could not demand a retribution that was bigger than the thing that first happened. So this law of loving neighbor as herself, or the law of equal concern, limited retribution. On the provocative side, or proactive side, the idea moved me along toward doing good for others. If I'm going to love my neighbor as myself, then it means that I want others to prosper as well as I have prospered, and it moves me to make sure that others prosper as I do. Matthew chapter 22, beginning verse 37, and he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment," Jesus says. "And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." And so Jesus said it emphatically. We need to love others as we love ourselves. It's that commandment, that Leviticus 19:18 commandment that Jesus repeats here and says, here's the number 1 and number 2 laws that exist. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself is the second one. And on these two things, all the law, all the prophets hinge, and it brings him to what we call the golden rule, right? Luke chapter 6, verse 31, "And as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them," or "do unto others you would have them to do unto you," if you want to go King James. So the equal concern ideology is a much better way for us to behave. Much better than selfishness, isn't it? It's better for me to focus on us than for me to focus on me. It's better. It works better. This idea of equal concern does all kinds of things, right? It eliminates crime. How much crime will there be if each person considered their neighbor as being as equal to themselves, as deserving of things as themselves? Am I going to go take something that's yours if I believe that you ought to have it, that you ought to prosper? Am I going to do it? Yeah, somebody ought to say something. It eliminates all prejudice. This idea of equal concern eliminates all prejudice. There are no people without value. Every person has as much value as I have. The law of equal concern, the golden rule, this idea of loving neighbor as self eliminates all prejudice, whether it be racial, social, economic. Well, it actually gets rid of that, doesn't it? This idea of equal concern celebrates when others are blessed. You see, the problem with me, the problem with selfishness is if someone else prospers, I'm filled with jealousy and envy. If I understand love thy neighbor as thyself, I understand this idea of equal concern, then when you prosper, I rejoice with you. So it takes us to our last point. As good of an idea as this idea of equal concern is, it's not the greatest of ideas or ideals. The greatest one is selflessness. The greatest I can aspire to is not to view you as my equal, but to view you as being superior to me, as more important. It's the idea of selflessness. It's what we are called to do. It's what God would have us to be like. It is for us to be God-like. In Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 1, Paul writes, "Therefore be imitators of God as dearly beloved children. It's not a suggestion. It is a commandment. Be imitators of God. And so I have to ask you, how does God look at us? As below Him? And we know we are. As equally important to Him? We know we're not. As more important than Him? I'm going to ask you, what causes the Father to say to the Son, we need to save these people, and the only way for us to save them is for you to become a part of the creation, for you to go to suffer and die on their behalf. We are called to be like our God. Not only are we called to be like our God in this idea of selflessness, God knows what is best for us. Even if it seems counterintuitive, this idea that we should love others above ourselves is what is best for us. It's like leaning into a left hook. It doesn't seem right, but I promise you, if you lean into it, it's not going to hit as hard. It doesn't seem right to be more concerned for others than I am for myself, but it is right. Romans chapter 12 and verse 10, love one another with brotherly affection, outdo one another in showing honor. How does that work? If you're not worth as much as I am, how am I going to outdo you in showing honor? It's not until I really believe at my heart, at my core, that you're more important than I am, then I will outdo you in showing honor. Philippians chapter 2 and verse 3, do nothing from selfish ambition. There's that first one, right? The problem with me, the whole self thing. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit. That's me looking down on you, isn't it? But in humility, count others as more significant than yourselves. Did I make it up? Or did Paul share it with us? We could go back to the words of our Savior. John 13, 34 through 35. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Well, there was nothing new about that, was there? Just as I have loved you. Now that's new. Leviticus 19:18 told us that we must love one another. But Jesus didn't call us just to love one another. He called us to love others as He has loved us. That's new. That's different. That's bold. That's loving others above yourself. He goes on to say, you are also to love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. He's essentially saying, people are going to know that you're my disciples when you love like I love. When you do like I do. And I promise you, what I do is going to be born out of who I love. Do I love me? Do I love us? Or do I love you? 1 John chapter 4, verses 10 and 11, in this is love. Not that we have loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son to be the propitiation or the satisfaction for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. I get the idea that John is saying, look, God has set a precedent. God has set a pattern. He's acted in such a way that we can understand what love is, and so live that kind of love. God so loved you and you love one another also is the idea that I'm going to love like He loves. It's the John 13, 34 and 35 love. Last passage. John 15, beginning in verse 12. This is my commandment, Jesus says, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I can claim friendship. I can say you are my friend. But it's not until I lay down my life that I'm really your friend. When we read that phrase, our mind immediately goes to a cross. It immediately goes to death. And there is no doubt that Jesus died for us. But let me ask you a question. How many things did Jesus do for us before He died on that cross? Was it to His personal advantage to leave the throne of God, to give up existing in the form of God and become a man? Was that to His personal advantage? When He came to this earth to be born among a poor family, to be wrapped in swaddling clothes, laid in a feed trough, and pretty much ignored by the world, was it to His advantage? Was it to His advantage to be sought out and for attempt on His life before He's ever even 2 years old to take place? Not to His advantage. Did He know it was going to happen? Yeah, He did. Thinking about His growing up. How'd you like growing up knowing that you were the creator of the world and yet you got to do everything your parents say just like everybody else? And all of the things as He did His ministry, as He was rejected, as He was misunderstood, even among those who were His dearest friends and closest followers. They didn't get it. Continually didn't get it. By the time of His arrest, He's just about all alone. Even His close friend Peter. I swear to God, I don't know the man. Cock-a-doodle-doo. And I'm just asking us this morning, was it to His personal advantage to go through all of that? Whose advantage was it for Him to do that and ultimately be on a cross? It was to our advantage. He considered us as being more important than Himself. And all I'm asking us this morning is to be like the Lord that we love. So this morning we talked about the problem with me. We talked about the better of us. And that the best is you. No matter who you is. Let us be those that don't spend all of our time trying to think about how to be selfish. Let us be those who consider others as least equal to ourselves and ideally more important than ourselves. It's what's commanded. It's what's best for us. And it is what will reach the world. By this, all men will know that you're my disciples, by the love you have for one another. This morning, the lesson is yours. I pray that God is working on your heart, whether you're about to walk down this aisle or not. I pray that if you walk down this aisle, you'll give us the opportunity to pray with you, to set up a study with you, to assist you in becoming a New Testament Christian this very day. If you've never been baptized into Christ, if you've never confessed Him as the Christ, the Son of God, if you've never repented of your sins and committed yourself to live for Him the rest of your life, we would love to be a part of that new walk this morning. Being raised up to walk in that newness of life. If we can serve you in some way, won't you come now while we stand and sing?
Only by grace can we enter. Only by grace can we stand.